You're listening to Blue, a story from the Zulu universe, written by Sam Renner, narrated by the voices at 11labs.io. Part 1. Raymond Hardstack watched the pretty lady on the screen that hung above him. She was a leggy blonde with hair piled high on her head. He didn't care much about the game she was hosting, he just liked to watch her clap the contestants on. She was a pleasant change from the news program that had been playing there earlier. At least he thought this station had something for him to do beyond just watching videos he'd downloaded to his datapad. This little diner. The screens above him that showed programming somehow beamed in from Earth. People that would come and go. That convenience store. A place to get restocked on essentials, including little vials of Modi if you knew the right questions to ask of the right people. His little room that included an almost comfortable bed. No. Zulu wasn't a bad place to be laid up if you have to be stalled out for a few days. 4 days to be exact. That's how long he'd been here. Long enough to become a familiar face to the women who worked the counter at this diner. The older woman, the one he'd figured for mom of the other two, gave him a smile and asked if he was hungry. Raymond nodded. Eggs over easy. Toast. Whatever bread is fine. Just like yesterday? And the day before and the day before? Raymond smiled. Coming up. She pauses like she's waiting for him to complete her sentence. Raymond. Coming up, Raymond. I'm Carol. Nice to meet you, Carol. Pleasantries. He'd forgotten what those were like. He didn't have much need for them anymore. A security agent for one of the largest mining companies in the galaxy spends most of his time bouncing from stations to haulers to shuttles to skiffs, never spending enough time in one spot to need to worry about making good impressions or learning names. But here, when he got the orders to hold tight on this transfer station while they sorted out a few things, it was like a vacation. It forced him to stop for a minute, to actually eat real meals and talk to real people. Real talk, real interaction, not just asking questions, trying to dig up the details about something that had gone wrong. It forced him to appreciate what was around him. He turned his stool away from the counter and looked out into the middle of the station. This place wasn't like all of those haulers he'd used to get around the galaxy. Blue Star Mining coordinating his travel with the supply ships they were constantly running out to the asteroids. Those were all the same, all utilitarian, metals and plastics. Great for shipping mining gear, drills and pumps and engines and gears the size of 2-story buildings, out to the intergalactic rocks that still had some kind of value. Not that he hated the haulers. There was something numbingly comfortable about the familiar, something that Raymond liked. But was it because he hadn't spent enough time here, at a place like Transfer Station Zulu, where there were things to see and people to watch? Raymond turned his seat back around when Carol said, "Here you go," and slid his plate onto the counter. Eggs with 2 wobbly yolks stared up at him. Triangles of toast placed above the whites completed the picture. He picked up his fork and poked at the eggs, turning his plate into a runny yellow mess. He cut the whites into tiny squares and swirled everything together into a sloppy pile. He scooped up a forkful and smeared it across half of one of the triangles of toast. He took a bite and savored the taste. He wasn't an idiot. He knew none of this was fresh. There wasn't some brood of chickens somewhere on this station walking around a square of grass, pecking at grain, and dropping eggs behind them. You didn't need chickens to get eggs anymore. Science had solved that problem a century ago. But damn if these didn't taste like the real thing. He didn't have to put hot water into a cup. He didn't have to squish some kind of pouch to start up a chemical reaction and warm up a pad of meat. This was real food on a real plate cooked by a real person and eaten with a knife and fork. He smeared more eggs across what was left of that piece of toast and popped the whole thing into his mouth. He looked down at the datapad that sat next to his plate. The screen was still black. It wouldn't be for much longer. Probably today, probably soon. It had flashed with a message from the chief about where he was headed next. He'd been told to hold in place for a while, and 4 days was pushing it. But something was happening. He could hear it in the voices of people he'd been talking to before being told to wait. They'd been hesitant, measuring their words, not wanting to say too much or be too specific with their answers to his questions. He'd been doing this long enough to know better than to press. It wouldn't do anything but make the team above him angry, and that was a sure way to get the wrong end of whatever work was about to be done. So he let it go. He let all of the questions he wanted to ask just float out of his head and into the nowhere, unasked. Instead, he sat here at this counter and ate these eggs and watched these screens and this leggy blonde clap for these contestants playing this dumb game. The small breakfast crowd slowly disappeared while Raymond watched the screens above the counter. The game show ended, and it returned to news. He watched with only half interest. Goings-on back on Earth held little for him. Yes, he was born there, but he never spent much time there. His dad had taken the family off-planet, chasing a better life. Save for a few years, he'd never found it, only given Raymond and his sister a growing up that was spent bouncing from station to station while Dad chased the next opportunity. None of those ever seemed to be back on Earth, the family just pushing out farther and farther into the black. So when he sees news programs talking about growing unrest or small protests, he doesn't really recognize any of the cities he's seeing or even know any of their names. Still, sitting at this counter where the people come and go and the scenery changes around him beats holding himself up in his cabin and staring at his datapad. The news program ends with a pair of talking heads shouting at each other. The volume is down, so he can't be certain, but he's seen plenty of yelling in his life. The screen fades to black for a moment, then the opening credits of the game show appear. There's his blonde again, new outfit this time, new episode. He watches as she claps on another set of excited contestants, an easy burn of an hour. Then it's the news again, the same news he saw when he sat down. The programming loop is repeating. For a moment he considers staying in this stool and taking the whole trip one more time. His considering is interrupted, though, by a flashing datapad. He has a new message. Looking at the now bright screen, he whispers to himself, "Here we go." Blue is a production of SciFiSerials.com and 6-to-1 Books and Media. Want to keep up with when new episodes are released? Visit the site, sign up for the newsletter, join the adventure.